Morning for everyone. The time is almost 11, so maybe we may wait 2 minutes more if it is okay for you also, Dr. Teresa.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, dear distinguished guests. I would like to thank all for your participation, and it's a great pleasure for us to host you in this seminar. Our dear rector is with us today. Now, I would like to give the floor to our rector, Professor Dr. Tuncay Doğeroğlu.
Thank you, Nazire. I'm very glad to be here to listen Dr. Teresa Franklin. He will talk about program review, supporting and QA in programs in the institution. You know that we have quite complicated progress on this matter in teaching and learning system, not only for our institution and also for faculties and high schools and the departments. Probably she will share her perspective and experiences about on this matter. I will listen very carefully, like all of us. Thank you very much again. I wish very successful and fruitful meeting and discussion platform. Thank you.
On behalf of everyone, I would like to thank Dr. Doğeroğlu for her opening speech. Today, our presenter is Professor Dr. Teresa Franklin, who is our Fulbright specialist. During her visit in Eskişehir Technical University, a series of seminars have been organized for administration, faculty members, and students as well. Her speech today is about program review. Specifically speaking, she will focus on quality assurance in programs. Before her presentation, let me introduce her. Dr. Teresa Franklin is a Professor Emerita Educational Studies, Instructional Technology in the Patton College of Education, Ohio University, Athens. She has a passion for teaching and learning through the integration of technology into curriculum and instruction that spans 40 years. Research interests include program evaluation and accreditation, curriculum design, examination of online learning environments, mobile technologies, virtual learning environments, and game development for digital learning. Dr. Teresa, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and good morning to all of you attending. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As she noted, we are going to look at program review today. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of different program reviews that I have worked on, the process that we go through typically in the United States. And I have looked out online at your accreditation and some of the work that has happened here in the university with accreditation. So we'll kind of go through that. It'll be a time for questioning. If you would like a copy of this presentation, at the end of the presentation is my email. I'll be happy to email you the whole thing, and then you can look at it, you know, at your leisure or review it again. So thank you so much for the introduction. I kind of built a little slide here for people so that you could see some of the things I've done over my time period as a faculty member. So just a quick review that I am here as a Fulbright specialist. I am also a YOCOC International Observer and Consultant. I am part of their team. I'm an emeriti professor. I do special projects at Ohio University. At Ohio University, not everyone gets to be an emeriti professor. That has to be voted on by the institution. And so I was selected to be an emeriti professor. And I work with the Office of Global Affairs now in the Center for International Studies with international kinds of programs. I was also a research scholar here in Turkey, where I examined use of mobile technologies, in particular cell phones, to deliver content. A professor of instructional technology. I have written 6 books. I'm in the 6th edition of my book called Science for All Children that looks at how you prepare science teachers to teach in K-12 environments. I've been on the National Council for the Accreditation of Teachers. And also I am now presently a national and international reviewer for CAPE, which is the accreditation program for education. SPAs, programs, all kinds of different things along that line, as well as journals, articles, and the things you expect from a professor are been kind of part of my bailiwick and life as a faculty member. But our seminar today is really going to examine and evaluate the difference between program accreditation and program review. We are going to provide some commentary and hopefully discussion on the process of program review, and then synthesize how some of the guiding principles of program review could be used in your own institution as part of a review process. And so I'll go through the cycles that we typically go through in the US and share those with you today. So first of all, we have to remember still that student learning is really interconnected. And today we're going to talk about the quality assurance process at the university concerning learning outcomes and faculties, as well as talking a little bit about program learning outcomes and how they fit into the process, and then the content of what you need to know and be able to do. So how is a program accreditation really different from program review? Well, first of all, program accreditation is really conducted by an outside agency. And I know that some of you have FedEc and MUDEC accreditation. And so you have those programs have been through the process. Really, accreditation is considered the gold standard because it is peer reviewed by experts in the field that are external to the institution. It is both summative and formative in its process. It is focused on a single program or sometimes a group of programs. So a single program might be nursing or teaching or engineering, or in some instances we have that are like business. So it'll take in all the business programs within a business college. So it depends on the different organizations that accredit that particular situation. It uses standards and guidelines on which to base a judgment. And these standards and guidelines have been created through professional standards, through the professions that surround that kind of program. It provides, in the US, it provides improved employment opportunities because graduates who come from accredited programs in the US are really considered to be of higher quality in some ways and typically are employed first. Often you have to be accredited to have a state licensure. So if you need a license in a certain area, you must also come from an accredited institution. For example, teaching is the easiest one because that's the one I'm most familiar with. But in order to get a license to teach in the United States, you must graduate from an accredited institution. So if you go to any other institution, you will still have to go finally to an accredited institution before you could get a license. And some of our programs in the United States require that you come from an accredited program to actually go to graduate school. So it really is dependent upon the discipline area, but these 3 things are why this adds value to our graduates in the United States. So some common accreditation models establish criteria that takes in all the program standards. They identify experts through professional societies. So the accreditation agency itself will actually train people to come in and do the accreditation. They are all considered to be experts in their field. They're a diverse group of people. They come together and they draft standards and guidelines by these experts. And typically they have their own quality assurance council. So that's a real common thing among our accreditation models, is that they have their own quality assurance council. There will be a call for comments that ask people to comment about the accrediting agency and how well that agency is doing. But also, when agency goes to an institution, the agency itself will call for comments from the public. So for example, if the College of Education at Ohio University was going through the accreditation process, there would be an expectation that the newspapers in areas where we have most of our teachers teaching around the state of Ohio and maybe the states contingent to Ohio, those newspapers would put out a bulletin that says, College of Education at Ohio University is undergoing accreditation. Please tell us comments or send comments that you have about that institution. And all of those comments come to us and are part of the package we send to the accrediting agency before they do their on-site visit. So all of these accreditation models have approved standards and guidelines that have been approved by the professional society. They build a self-assessment tool that they then distribute to all those different organizations that, like colleges of education. And they distribute these to all the programs in the field. Now it does cost money, which I'm sure is probably the same thing is true of FedEc and MUDEC, is it does cost money to bring people to the university for accreditation and to be part of the accreditation organization. So there is a financial piece that goes with program accreditation. So you know your accrediting agencies, but here's a group that I pulled from the web that I thought, just in case you haven't, there's a link down at the bottom that will help you find those agencies. And there's a whole bunch more on the page as well. This comes from YOCOC. These are examples of US agencies. And again, there are lists at the top. There's a link at the top where you can look at the agency list and find out about those agencies. The really good thing about having these links, I think, is that I can go out and look at all the other areas of education and I can say, oh, in special ed, they do this. These are their learning outcomes. In reading, they do this. In engineering, they do this. In business, oh, these are their learning outcomes. So I can actually see the different learning outcomes. And often we look at each other's learning outcomes to then help formulate our own. So for example, CAPE, which is the Council for the Accreditation of Education Preparation, it has 7 large standards. They're content and pedagogy, clinical partnerships and practice, candidate recruitment, progression, and support. This is a really interesting one that has been recently added, and that is no longer are we looking at the GPAs of people coming into our program. We're actually looking at how we recruit the best candidates. How do they progress through our program? Do they grow? So what is their growth process in the program? And then how do we support them with tutoring, remediation, those kinds of things? So this is a new piece that has come into standards since the Obama administration, since President Obama was in the office. We now also look at our program impact. How many jobs are they going to? What kind of schools are they going to? What kind of impact are they having? When we put our teachers into your K-12 schools, do your school scores go up? Because we track all of our K-12 school scores, achievement scores. And so we're also looking to see, do we improve that? Quality assurance system, as everyone else has, and continuous improvement is the focus. Fiscal and academic capacity. And then of course, as with everyone else, we have regulations that are part of the Higher Education Act and Title IV, and we have to show compliance to those regulations. And I'm pretty sure that's typical of most of these things. This is kind of an example of standard 1 on CAPE. and it is looking at content and pedagogical knowledge. There's a little explanation. And then there's a list of what we call benchmarks. I've highlighted here that there's an expectation that they do the INTAS standard. These are standards for teaching. This is what research and evidence tells us are the best ways to improve teaching. And so there is an expectation that as part of the standard that we will implement those research practices and that evidence for creating better teachers. Now, the really interesting thing for it might be that here's what I'm talking about when I talk about professional societies. These societies all had input on the development of these standards. So you'll see that all of these different societies are associated somehow with education. Whether it's higher education or K-12 education, they all have something to do with education. And so they are the ones who actually put together the original set of standards. They allowed educators across the country to look at them and to make comment. And then they voted on the standards and how they felt they should be enforced and applied in the situation. There are really 6 accreditation misconceptions that often occur. And these are the ones we hear over and over again when we talk about accreditation. The first one is that accreditation does not protect students from bad schools. That's always the first one, is that there are still bad schools out there. And that is indeed probably the case. However, we really, through accreditation, because a college or faculty cannot come up for accreditation until they have been reviewed, they've done a pre-review, we don't allow them to come through the accreditation process until they meet certain standards. And so they can't even begin to become accredited or even be considered for accreditation until they actually go through that process of pre-review. And so it is unlikely that an institution that does not meet accreditation standards would ever be accredited. And we do remove accreditation. We've done that recently, especially from schools we call predatory schools. And predatory schools are schools that, one, are not accredited, but also are not meeting any kind of educational standards according to the US Department of Education. And so that's a really unlikely that you would have a bad school that is accredited. The second is accreditation is focused on the wrong thing. Well, all accreditation in the United States is looking at what is it that students should know and be able to do within their discipline. And so that is where our focus is. So that's unlikely as well. The second is accreditation is not transparent. Given that, one, the standards are out there, all of the documentation that we provide to accreditation is available online for review by the public. And the fact that we ask for public comment on the institution from anyone in the country that has worked with the institution, it is unlikely that you could say we are not transparent. It's actually more transparent than most of the activities within the university. The fourth one is accreditation is riddled with conflicts of interest. That's really blatantly false because in the United States, you cannot be a member of an accrediting team that is going to review an institution if you have published with them, if you have participated in a grant with them, if you have worked with them on a project. In the state of Ohio, I cannot go to any evaluation reviews because I'm known in Ohio. And so that takes out all the universities in Ohio, there's 33 of them, that I cannot review because I'm known in that state. I can also not review in some of the institutions in Texas because I've worked with grants with them and so forth. So really the conflict of interest is very carefully monitored by the accrediting agencies in the US. And then accreditation reviews are too infrequent. Most of them are on a yearly cycle in which they have to produce a report, so telling what they've been doing all year, how they've addressed the standards and so forth. Not as long as the self-evaluation report, but still still it's every year it occurs. And so then the accreditation occurs every 5 years. And so it's a constant look at yourself, self-evaluation process. And then finally, misconception number 6, it's not always fair to institutions and programs. Given that institutions are part of the selection process in that they go to the accrediting agency and say, we want to be accredited, or it's time for our review. The accrediting agency is trying to make sure there's no conflicts of interest, that they are being transparent in who is selected. And so it's really as fair as it's probably going to ever be in the case of the judgment that is passed on to institutions and programs. But we have in Ohio University and other institutions across the United States, we have programs that do not have agencies to accredit them. So what do you do then? For example, in the US, we have lots of programs that really do not have an agency, in particular chemistry and biology and those particular fields in science. We have a lot of things like Italian studies and German studies and classical studies that do not have accrediting agencies. And so we have developed a process for what happens when we don't have one of those agencies. And in that process, these are the considerations that need to occur. Excuse me just for a second. First of all, what is the program's purpose? What are the current methods of the QA that exist within the program itself? How are institutional QA criterion applied within the program? How can specific accreditation guidelines be developed? How can teams of external evaluators by discipline be developed? How do program activities reflect discipline best practices? Because most of the time, program review is based upon best practices and then the discipline-specific kinds of practice. And then what is the level of alumni participation in the curriculum development and review? How do faculty and students interact in the field and society? And then how well are faculty prepared, and what are the professional development expectations? So in an institutional program review, such as might occur at Ohio University or Indiana University or Cal State, any of the state institutions in the US, typically there's an expectation that it will align with the strategic plan of the institution. They develop a self-study that aligns with best practices or the professional discipline, and they probably will look at national and international occupational standards. So there's typically an alignment to industry to see how things are going, how they would better develop their curriculum to align with industry. They may have qualitative and quantitative assessments that are tied to program learning outcomes and course learning outcomes. And they're used as evidence for delivering undergraduate and graduate education. In our particular case at Ohio University, the program review is initiated and conducted by the Program Review Committee, which is part of the University Curriculum Council. Now, the University Curriculum Council is also part of the Faculty Senate. So it goes from Faculty Senate to Curriculum Council and then to Program Review Committee. So those three groups are going to actually view this process as the process occurs. So the guiding principles that we've established for program review are to be broadly participatory. That is, we expect everyone who is a program stakeholder to be talked to be involved, to be engaged in the process. We're going to facilitate assessment planning, curriculum development. We're going to look at faculty workload, scholarship responsibilities, and resource allocation. And so in this particular one, we're looking at the teaching and learning process, but we're also looking at those things that are required for tenure. So are those two balanced so that faculty can actually do an outstanding job in teaching and learning, but they also don't have a workload so much that they cannot attend to their scholarship responsibility. Then it looks at the university resources, support among the different constituencies on campus to actually work with faculty in the program. It looks to see if we're collegial. and that we are having objective reviews of our program to really make sure that it does have academic quality. Then we look at the sources of information from faculty, administrators, trustees. Our board of trustees actually writes a little piece. Stakeholders, programmatic strengths and weaknesses, the status of the staff, resources, student profiles. I mean, what kind of GPAs come in? How much growth do they occur when they leave? Where are they getting their jobs? Are they meeting their PLOs and CLOs? And then equipment and facility needs, really equipment and space needs. Do we need more technology? Do we need different technology? Also, the budgeting is a really important part of this. And then they're reviewed periodically to help identify program, college, and university priorities, because over time, jobs change. And one of the things that we have learned in Ohio University and across the United States is that sometimes programs are not really viable. And those programs, as part of the review, look to see if they're still viable within the structure of the institution and the structure of what is going on in society. And so we may pare down programs. For example, about 5 years, maybe 6 years ago, we found out that we had too many elementary or pre-education teachers, okay, early childhood teachers. We had 3 teachers for every job. And so that was too many early childhood teachers in the US. And since we are one of the huge producers of teachers, we are a very large program in the US, and we send our teachers all over the US, we decided that we needed to not admit as many pre-service teachers so that we could begin to even out what was available in the labor market versus what we were producing at the institution. Now you can imagine how unhappy many were with that process. But that is part of what program review does. It helps us identify how we align to industry, and then also what's going on in society and where the need is. Now, as we began that process of slowing down admissions, we were keeping an eye on it because we then had to, over time, begin to increase back up to make sure we leveled that process. So it's a very delicate balance, but it's one of the jobs of accreditation and also program review is to keep an eye on industry and see what's going on there. We also look at, how many grants a program may have, how many publications they may have. Although I have to say publications is not really a big consideration in either program review or accreditation in the US, because we feel that's taken care of by the tenure review process within an institution. And every institution is different in the United States on that particular category. And so really they're just looking to see that the faculty member is progressing in their work as a faculty member. So this is the most common model in the US for institutional program review. So you have a new program or a program that has been with the institution for a while that should be reviewed. So what happens is Faculty Senate keeps track of that. They send information to the University Curriculum Council. They send it down to a review committee. Excuse me. The review committee goes out to do this. They check for conflict of interest, to make sure no one's published together, they've not worked on projects together. Being on the review committee won't negatively or positively impact the evaluation. Those are their 3 criteria. Then they look at the qualifications of people who will serve on the review committee. So typically a Faculty Senate member or a University Curriculum Committee member is on there. We typically have a full professor chair it, because we don't want a conflict if there's an associate professor arguing with a full professor. So we usually have a full professor chair it. That's our reason behind that. Everyone has to be the rank of associate professor or above. We do not have any assistant professors. There typically is a diversity of fields by academic staff. So we don't just have people from the field that is being reviewed, but other members of the campus who would work possibly with this group at time to time. We have an odd number of members to make voting easier. We look at a stakeholder expert from outside the university. Typically, that's only one person, and we have had instances where we didn't have a stakeholder expert, depending on what was going on within the institution. But typically, we have one stakeholder expert. And then what we do is work toward the selection of people who can be objective and lacking in bias. And that's a really important characteristic. You have to remember to kind of take off your hat that says you're in instructional technology when you're reviewing someone from psychology. After that, we began a data collection process in which we're looking at data to see how that data was used and the information we got from it, and then how it was used to demonstrate that student learning had occurred, because that is really our focus, is on student learning. Samples of evidence for a program to present to our particular committee is maybe program specifications, annual program report, course specifications. So a matrix that lines those up to show how they work together, the course learning outcomes and the program learning outcomes. Students and how many have achieved those student learning outcomes, their field experience. If there is a report, then that report goes there. Key performance indicators, if there are such. Self-study report, and then a self-evaluation scales that maybe the institution imposes. So these are program evidence. Then we look at student achievement, and these are the things data that has to come on student achievement. Program learning outcomes that are met by each student, graduation rates, employment rates, meetings with alumni. So how often do we meet with alumni to see if we're staying connected to the field? Course learning outcomes, international students, national exam scores, certification and licensure tests, micro-credentials, if we have a piece that has micro-credentials, time to graduation, portfolio outcomes, internships, co-ops, those kinds of things. And then examples of remediation, because in our particular case, in the United States, we're trying to be sure that we are putting out graduates that can read and write and do all those 21st century skills. And so we may have some remediation that has to occur if they are not meeting the program learning outcomes and the course learning outcomes. So we have a remediation cycle as well. Once that data has all been collected, we create a program self-study that typically contains these parts. I put in NQF for you guys and ECTS. In our case, we would go with whatever standards, best practices are in the field. But we have a mission, goals, learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, how the program's maintained, teaching staff, all the same kind of things that you would expect in a self-study report. Once that self-study report is sent to the review committee takes a look at it, reads it, makes notes, questions they're going to ask, and they do what we call a program site visit. And so at this particular case, the review on site typically includes classroom visits when faculty are teaching, facilities to look at the facilities, meetings with the deans, department chairs, program administration, because we have not just a department, but we have coordinators for every program. Meetings with program faculty, meetings with students, meeting with alumni, meeting with industry, anyone that our particular program would touch. Questions that we often see are, what is your alignment to the university strategic plan? Explain your quality assurance process. How do you make sure that you're doing that continuous improvement cycle? And what kind of data are you collecting? Evidence that the PLOs and CLOs are met. How was the data collected and how often is it collected? Because we like to have 2 cycles of data at least every time there's a review. How the data was used to make decisions, how data was stored and who has access, because we want to be sure data is secure, and how the program has changed and why the change occurred since the last program review. So in the final steps, which are review summary, administration, and 1-year follow-up, we go through a process in which we look at the review committee has 30 days in order to report to the administration. The administration, if there are concerns, then they ask for an action plan on how you as a program are going to address those concerns. And then they do a 1-year follow-up just to make sure that all those concerns have been addressed. Now, sometimes you have only positive kinds of things, and so there aren't any significant negatives that need to be addressed. And so the 1-year follow-up may not occur. So it really depends on the concerns by the review committee that goes to the administration. So this is a continuous improvement cycle. It includes all of these things: the initiation, the review, the data collection, study, self-study, on-site visit, review summary, administration follow-up, and then a 1-year follow-up if there are negatives that need to be dealt with. So this is a very common model that is a plan, do, check, act sort of model. The goal of all institutional program review is continuous improvement. That is the #1 goal, to make sure that we are constantly looking at how students are learning and are those learning outcomes being met. It is also an internal review process to make sure that the institution and the program are on the same page, that they're moving in the same direction together and are part of that quality assurance cycle of the institution. It keeps the program relevant because you find out that maybe things are going on in industry that you as a faculty member, because you're busy doing your research, busy getting ready for courses, hadn't noticed that there was a change. Curriculum is evaluated to make sure that all the needs of that program are met. Graduate success is always measured. That is a big part of our evaluation review, our review process. That faculty have demonstrated growth. We actually have a process in which faculty each year establish goals and what kind of professional development will they do in order to reach those goals. And so at the same time, we're checking off our faculty, learning new things. Are they keeping up with industry? Are they doing the professional development that will make them a better instructor at the institution for the students? And then it also helps keep us connected to our alumni. And in the United States, alumni are a very important part of our work because alumni are the ones who typically provide funding for different kinds of activity on campus. They provide equipment, things like that. They are a source of funding in many cases in our institutions. And so alumni are very important to us. So what is the big difference between accreditation and review? Well, the biggest difference is that accreditation has external peer reviewers that have been trained. They have developed a set of standards and criteria through their professional society. So they are all part of a professional society. And they are responsible for taking care of that accreditation process. With program review, it is internal, and it may or may not use peers. It may or may not use professional standards. It really depends upon what the institution decides. And so people are always asking me, which would you think is the better one? Well, I think it depends upon the program and what's going on within the institution. Which one adds greater value to your students is really the question that you have to consider as you develop a process. Because you want your students to be quality when they leave your institution and represent you well. And so how you decide to do program review is critically important, and the kind of value you can add to your student as they leave the institution. Now, we have one more little weird thing that we do in the US. And that is that even if you're accredited, like my particular field is an accredited field, even if you're accredited, you have to go at our institution, you have to go through an institutional program review as well. So you actually do both. You show not only are you accredited and aligning to your profession and professional standards, but you go through this cycle of institutional program review as well to make sure that you are aligned to the institution and that you are supporting their priorities, the institution's priorities, and that you are part of their quality assurance program. And so this is one of the ways that we maintain buy-in concerning quality assurance within our institution, is because it's great to be accredited. We want everyone to be accredited by their professional standards, but at the same time, we also want these programs not to be able to just say, oh, we're accredited, we're going to do our own thing. We want them to be able to show that they are also aligned to our institution and that they are part of who we are and that they are taking care of the university priorities and know about the strategic plan and have buy-in into that strategic plan. Again, just a continuous improvement process of trying to show that we're working hard to help our students learn, that we are accountable and we have value as an institution. So my final thoughts on this before we have time for discussion is that one, this is a pretty steady process. It happens over and over. And sometimes when people finish the program review, they say to themselves, we're done, but you're not. It's not a means to an end. The only way you're going to get better is to constantly check yourself. Are you doing the things you say you're doing? What kind of plan, what kind of action are you going to take if you don't? And then start the whole process of planning and then implementing all over again. So it's not a means to an end. It's always constant because we live in a time of accountability. People are watching us and what we're doing and how well we're doing it. So often it's a 3 to 5 year process for one cycle. And that's why I said you had to have multiple years of data at our institution. And so we typically are on a 5-year cycle. All stakeholders have to be part of the process. We actually look to see if they are all involved. We keep copious notes of who came to every meeting and when we invited them, who we invited and all that sort of thing. Minutes of meetings are kept. All of that serves as evidence. Students, faculty, staff, administration, your business partners, all of these people should be talked to. And I'm sure because you're so heavily involved here with corporate partners that you do those kinds of things. And I think the most important thing is for programs and the institution, the administration with the institution, is to remember this is not about we got you, you're doing it wrong. It's about continuous improvement. Okay, we see what you're doing. We're not sure that really measures the outcomes that you think it measures. So is there another way we can reach that goal? And so I think that's the really important thing, that a lot of people look at it as punitive. It's a punishment, but it's not really a punishment. It's about improving and helping reach the institution goals, the program goals, and making sure your students learn. So buy-in and accountability are really an important part of this process. And then last is something that occurs, I think, at every institution as we go through change. And that is sometimes we get into reform fatigue. Have we done so many of these different change things? Are we exhausted? And so I think you have to have opportunities in this process to get together as colleagues, once COVID's over, get together as colleagues and celebrate the things that have been done and the things that have been done well. We've been out on your website. Dr. Doug Franklin, my husband, and I have both been out on your website. You have lots of great information out there with program learning outcomes and course learning outcomes and those kinds of things. You've done some really great work, and you need to celebrate that work as an institution and as a faculty. So I have some questions for you because, I've been yakking along here. So what are some things that I have questions about? So where are you in this process of program review and who all is involved? Because lots of times we find, especially in the first cycle, one faculty member who is very strong in the program often tries to take it over and kind of direct it. And it's got to be fully all faculty and all stakeholders involved. So who's involved? Are you currently doing program review, and how do you select your peer evaluators? So these are some questions that I wanted to open up to the floor. If people want to answer or talk about those things or ask me questions about our process, I'm certainly happy to entertain those. So if you have other questions, now's the time to speak up as well.
Okay, I'm just checking the chat box. On the chat box, no question, but maybe our participants could raise their hand if you have any question, dear participants. Maybe I can ask.
Oh, I've got one chat here.
Yeah. Okay.
Who authorizes is the accreditation agencies in the US. Can there be more than one authorized accreditation agency for the same field or program? Very good question. In the US, the accreditation agencies are independent from the government. However, the US Department of Education acts as a kind of oversight, I guess would be the better thing. They typically make sure that they're not doing predatory activities. They look at program evaluation criteria, and they kind of check the accreditation agencies. We are part of CHIA as well. And in my particular field, we have two possibilities for accreditation. We have AECT, which is for those people who are wanting to be more of an instructional designer, because we have in our program, we have two tracks. We have people who are going to go into education in classrooms and teach computer science in classrooms. And then we have people who are going to be instructional designers. And so we have ISTE, which is more for the educator part. And we also have AECT, which is more for the designer part. And so in reality, yes, we could have two accreditation agencies. Both of those agencies, it's been really interesting because we are accredited by both of them. And the really interesting thing is ISTE right now has decided they don't want to do accreditation for a little while. They're taking a break and going to reformat their standards because they feel like they're not meeting the field. That happens. And so we do have an accrediting agency. We are accredited by the instructional design piece. And so, but we are accredited by the large umbrella of CAPE because we prepare teachers. So we maintain a level of accreditation. It's just not as specific to the field at this point, except for instructional design. So it's a really interesting thing in the US because the US Department of Education really doesn't have a strong thumb kind of hold on us. They really want the accrediting agencies to use their professional societies. And so I'll let Doug kind of also talk about this because he does more of HLC, which is more of an institutional piece.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to do was clarify CHIA. CHIA is the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. CHIA has an international wing called CIQG, and that's a YOCOC, one of the agencies that YOCOC is a member of. CHIA accredits the accreditors. So in order to accredit in the United States, you must meet two criteria. One is the Department of Education, their criteria and their review, and the other one is a CHIA review. If you don't have both of those, then you cannot accredit in the United States. And the purpose of this is, as Dr. Teresa said, is to remove predatory schools and predatory accreditors. And so as we look at the accrediting agencies in Turkey, we've already seen one agency that has removed its accreditation ability from YOCOC. And so that's the distance learning accrediting agency, audit, has not been renewed. The other one that you want to look at is MIAC, which you have accreditation, but they have not been renewed by YOCOC, according to the website. Now, I don't know, I'll ask YOCOC next week, but we do everything in the United States with education pretty much on a triangular basis. Department of Education oversees through a negotiated process, CHIA, and then whatever the accrediting agency is in that particular learning society.
Yeah, we are very focused on learned societies and how those really establish the standards. And because we feel those people are most directly connected to the field. And so that's a really important piece for us, is the learned societies. Okay.
One question from Dr. Nuray Gedik.
Yeah, I've got talking about quality. What's the amount of maximum workload for an academic staff, including the total hours of weekly teaching? Number for Masters of Science, PhD students supervising at the time, times spared for academic, sorry, it's tiny, academic publishing and research, so that we can really say that a minimum level of quality is met. I think in our particular case in the US, we are looking at student learning outcomes. And so we are looking for quality is, do the students know, and are they able to do the things that would make them successful in the field once they remove themselves or leave the institution? We are about outputs, outcomes. What is going out from our institution is what gives us a reputation. Our university has a very strong reputation in engineering. It has a very strong reputation in business. It has a very strong reputation in teacher education. And so for us, we want to be sure that our students, when they go out and take their jobs, people love them and say, these are the best employees we've ever had. That's our goal. So we are focusing on outputs. And so you asked kind of several questions here, so let me break it apart and make sure I understand for sure what you're asking. But that's how we talk about quality. We talk about quality from a student learning standpoint. And when we talk to each other as faculty, that's how we talk to each other. So the maximum workload in our institution, depending upon, we have some faculty who are just teaching faculty. Those people teach what we call a 3-3 semester, 3 courses each semester. The courses are usually 4 hours apiece. So, and some teach a 3-2. So it depends upon the field. If you have labs and things like that, and you're an undergraduate faculty member, you teach 3 courses and 2 courses. So 3 courses one semester, 2 courses the next semester, or vice versa. And so they will be 3-hour courses each. So if you have a 3-3, if you have a 3, then you've got 3, 6, 9 hours of teaching a week. Okay, so 9 hours of teaching a week. In the teaching faculty ranks, there is not an expectation or a high expectation for publishing. So it could be that you maybe do some presentations, you work on what we call service committees in the community and things like that, and you may not do very much publishing. If you are on the research teaching track, then you have a 3-2 or a 2-2 schedule. Again, 3 hours apiece. So you would be expected to do research a third of your time. You are expected to teach a third of your time in a week, and you are expected to do service a third of your time. So it's divided into 3s. Now, some weeks I did mostly research, and taught my classes that were required. And some weeks and did no service. And then another time I might do a lot of presentations out with teachers, go out and work with teachers and things like that. So I did more service. The idea is to kind of maintain that 3-3-3, okay, the third of a week. The interesting thing is all of this is on our CV that we have to give for review every year. So every year we go through a kind of a mini tenure process in that we have to explain everything we've done all year and how much time we spent on it and who saw it and how many people reviewed it and all that kind of stuff. And that happens every single year because it is part of how we get paid. So you might keep the same salary. If you had been really doing a lot of stuff that year and got a lot of grants and we're doing more research, maybe you got a patent or something, you might get more money. So this review each year is part of a pay structure that we have in the United States. Looking specifically at PhD and master students, which is, I started out as an undergraduate faculty member and then became a master's and PhD. I taught 2 courses each semester and was expected to do publishing. I was expected to do 2 to 3 publications a year, a certain number of presentations, and there's a list of stuff they want you to do.
Can I answer that question as well?
Okay, Doug wants to actually comment on this as well.
Yeah, if I can, I think cut to the underlying reason of the question, it was probably how much time do you have to do quality assurance? How much time do you do program review? One of the things that I've been doing while I've been here is looking at a quality of culture. How do you establish a quality of culture? And in speaking to the vice rector the other day, we talked about how do you make this part of your regular work? Quality assurance should not be an add-on. It should not be done by one group. It should be done by everybody. The idea about quality assurance is that anybody within the organization understands the parameters of quality and can affect the outcome of that quality at any time during the year, during the operation. So if you find a policy or a process that's not working, that is not providing the outcome that you want, then you need to change that policy as quickly as you can. Program review merely is that time when you look at your program on a regular basis, have people come in and say, yeah, you're doing this well, or you might want to work on some of these other things. But all of that should be done within your normal job. It should not be done as an extra. And I think that's really what we get to. It's difficult to look at an institution across the country. You know, if we look at the United States, every university, we have 7,000 universities, both 2-year and 3-year schools, private and public and not-for-profit and profit. So we have a lot of diversity. They're going to look at this a little bit differently. I think what you have to do is assess what you're doing, the amount of time that you're working on this, and then how can you fit in the process, the review process? How can we make it, when I go back to YOCOC, and as they're developing a standardized program review process, how can we make that process not onerous, easy to work through, that provides the results? And so we're looking at two things. We're looking at efficiency and we're looking at effectiveness. We don't want to add things to your job, but we want to make sure that we understand your programs and provide you an opportunity to get better through the quality assurance process.
Okay, other questions?
Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, this is my email, and I will be happy to send you this presentation if you're interested.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Teresa and Franklin. Is there anyone who wants to add contributions, provide contribution? I think no. Okay.
Great, it was great to be with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution and participation. See you in